Welcome. I trust you are ready for a new mystery to unfold.
The ring she hid in the piano. A Hercule Poirot mystery. Welcome to Cozy Mysteries. I'm Stephen, your narrator, and today I'm sharing with you an extraordinary case that came to the attention of the famous Belgian detective Hercule Poirot. It was a crisp autumn evening in London when this puzzling affair began, one that would challenge even Poirot's exceptional powers of deduction. Chapter 1: The Vanishing Diamond. The little detective was meticulously arranging his morning correspondence when his landlady knocked upon the door of his Baker Street lodgings. A young woman, she announced, urgently required his assistance. Poirot set down his letter opener with characteristic precision and instructed that the visitor be shown in immediately. Miss Celeste Whitmore entered the room like a whirlwind of distress. She was perhaps 25, with auburn hair that caught the gaslight and green eyes bright with unshed tears. Her elegant dress suggested comfort, though not ostentatious wealth. She clutched a silk handkerchief in her gloved hands as if it were an anchor. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice trembling, "I've heard of your reputation. Please, you must help me. Something terrible has happened." Poirot gestured graciously toward the comfortable chair opposite his desk. "Mademoiselle, please seat yourself. Tell to me what troubles you so greatly." Miss Whitmore perched on the edge of the chair, clearly agitated. "It's my engagement ring, Monsieur Poirot. It was stolen last night during my own rehearsal dinner. The ceremony is tomorrow today, actually, as it's past midnight now, and I simply cannot marry without it." "Ah," murmured Poirot, his green eyes beginning to show that peculiar intensity his friends knew so well. "This ring, it has special significance, no doubt. It belonged to my grandmother, then my mother. It's been in our family for 3 generations. Beyond its sentimental value, it's worth nearly £3,000, a magnificent sapphire surrounded by diamonds." Fresh tears threatened to spill. "Without it, I feel as though I'm betraying my family's memory." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Where was this dinner held, mademoiselle?" "At Ashworth Manor, my fiancé's family estate in Kent. We had perhaps 30 guests, immediate family and closest friends only. The ring disappeared sometime during the evening. I discovered it missing when I retired to my room around 11 o'clock." "You are certain you wore it to dinner?" "Absolutely certain. I remember admiring how it caught the candlelight during the first course. When I went to remove it before bed, it was gone." Poirot's fingers drummed silently on his desk. "And you suspect someone in particular?" Miss Whitmore hesitated, colour rising in her cheeks. I hardly know what to think. The guests were all people we trust implicitly, but there were servants about, and—" She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with the implication. "The police, they have been notified." "Oh no." The response was immediate and emphatic. "We cannot involve the police. The scandal would ruin everything. My fiancé's family is very prominent. His father is Sir Edmund Ashworth, the shipping magnate. Any whisper of theft at our wedding rehearsal would be in every newspaper by afternoon." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. The desire to avoid scandal often made his work both easier and more complex. "Very well, mademoiselle. You wish me to recover your ring discreetly before your wedding ceremony?" "Yes, exactly. The ceremony is at 3 o'clock this afternoon at St. Margaret's Church. If you could find it before then." Her voice carried desperate hope. "Tell me more about this dinner. Who was present? What was the atmosphere? Did anything unusual occur?" Miss Whitmore composed herself, clearly trying to recall every detail. "The evening began wonderfully. Everyone seemed in high spirits. My fiancé, Richard Ashworth, was particularly charming. His sister Caroline played piano for us after dinner. She's quite accomplished. The music was lovely." "Anyone else provide entertainment?" "Actually, yes. We had engaged a professional pianist, Signor Marcello, to accompany the evening. He's rather famous, you know. Caroline typically doesn't like sharing her piano, but she was gracious about it for the occasion." "Interesting. And the servants?" "The usual household staff, plus several hired for the evening. Mrs. Fleming, the head housekeeper, supervised everything. She's been with the family for decades. Then there was the hired help, servers, kitchen staff. Oh, and my personal maid Jenny accompanied me from London. Poirot made several notes in his precise handwriting. This maid of yours, she is trustworthy. Again that slight hesitation. Jenny has been with me for 2 years. She's always been reliable though. Miss Whitmore bit her lip. She's mentioned some financial difficulties recently. Her mother's medical expenses, I believe. Ah, and your fiancé, Monsieur Richard. He was with you throughout the evening. Mostly yes, though he did excuse himself several times to speak with his father about business matters. The Ashworth Shipping Company is negotiating some important contracts, I understand. The little detective's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Mademoiselle, I will help you, but I must have complete honesty from you. Is there anything else, anything at all that you have not told me? Miss Whitmore met his gaze steadily. Nothing, Monsieur Poirot. I've told you everything I can think of. Très bien. Then we must depart for Kent immediately. Time, as you say, is of the utmost importance. As they prepared to leave, Poirot's mind was already working. Something about this case intrigued him beyond the simple matter of a missing ring. The young woman's manner suggested depths beneath the surface, emotions carefully controlled, details perhaps deliberately omitted. The game, as they say, was afoot. Chapter 2: Shadows at Ashworth Manor. The journey to Kent through the pre-dawn darkness gave Poirot opportunity to observe his client more closely. Miss Whitmore sat rigidly upright in the railway carriage, staring out at the passing countryside, though surely seeing nothing in the blackness. Her hands remained clenched in her lap, and occasionally she would touch her bare ring finger with an almost unconscious gesture. "Tell me, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, "how long have you been engaged to Monsieur Richard?" 6 months, she replied without turning from the window. "We met at a charity gala last spring. He was quite persistent in his attentions. Ah, the romance, it was sudden." Now she did look at him, and he caught a glimpse of something, pain perhaps, in her green eyes. Richard can be very compelling when he sets his mind to something. The Ashworths are, they're not easily denied. An curious way to describe one's beloved, Poirot reflected. And the ring was his grandmother's choice for the engagement. Actually no, I insisted on using my family's ring rather than accepting one of the Ashworth heirlooms. Richard was somewhat disappointed, but he acquiesced eventually. More and more interesting. The detective filed away this information as their train pulled into the small station serving the Ashworth estate. Ashworth Manor loomed against the grey dawn sky like something from a Gothic novel. Built in the Tudor style with later additions, it sprawled across manicured grounds that spoke of generations of wealth and privilege. Even in the uncertain light, Poirot could see it was a house that harboured secrets. They were met at the front entrance by a stern-faced woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed despite the early hour. This, Miss Whitmore explained, was Mrs. Fleming, the head housekeeper. "Miss Whitmore," Mrs. Fleming said with obvious concern, "such a distressing business. Sir Edmund is in his study. He's been up all night worrying about the situation." "Is Richard awake?" Miss Whitmore asked. "Master Richard is in the breakfast room, miss. He's been rather agitated since you left for London." They found Richard Ashworth pacing before the dining room windows, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold on the table. He was a handsome man in his early 30s, with the confident bearing that comes from inherited wealth and social position. When he saw Miss Whitmore, relief flooded his features. "Celeste, thank God you're back. This whole business is intolerable." His eyes fell on Poirot with obvious displeasure. "And this is Monsieur Hercule Poirot." The detective introduced himself with a slight bow. "I am here to assist in recovering the missing ring." Richard's jaw tightened. "I've told Celeste repeatedly that we should handle this matter privately, bringing in outsiders." "Monsieur Ashworth," Poirot interrupted smoothly, "I understand your concerns about discretion. I assure you my methods are both effective and confidential." "Richard, please." Miss Whitmore placed a calming hand on her fiancé's arm. "Monsieur Poirot comes highly recommended. We need professional help." Before Richard could respond, another voice spoke from the doorway. "So this is our famous detective." The woman who entered was clearly Richard's sister, the same aristocratic features, though her dark hair and sharp eyes gave her a more formidable appearance. Caroline Ashworth moved with the self-assurance of someone accustomed to being the most intelligent person in any room. "Caroline," Richard said with obvious irritation, "this is Monsieur Poirot, indeed, and I suppose you'll want to question everyone who was present last evening." Caroline's tone was coolly amused. "How thoroughly dramatic. Mademoiselle Caroline, you are the accomplished pianist, no? Miss Whitmore mentioned your performance last evening. Among other musical contributions, yes. We had quite an evening of entertainment." Something in her tone suggested layers of meaning Poirot didn't yet understand. "Perhaps you could show me the room where the dinner was held, and afterward the piano." Caroline's eyebrows rose slightly. The piano? An odd request, but certainly. As they moved through the manor's elegant corridors, Poirot observed everything with his characteristic attention to detail. The house spoke of old money and older secrets, portraits of stern ancestors, furniture that had witnessed generations of family dramas, corners where whispered conversations might be overheard. The dining room was magnificent, with a table that could seat 20 comfortably. French doors opened onto a terrace overlooking formal gardens. Mrs. Fleming had clearly supervised a thorough cleaning, but Poirot's trained eye caught details others might miss: a slight stain on one chair's fabric, scratches on the parquet floor near the sideboard. "The ring," he mused aloud. "When did you last notice it, mademoiselle?" Miss Whitmore stood by her chair from the previous evening, touching the back thoughtfully. "I remember adjusting it during the fish course. The stones caught the candlelight beautifully, and after dinner, we moved to the music room for entertainment. Caroline played several pieces, then Signor Marcello performed. It was quite lovely." "This Signor Marcello, he is still here?" "Oh no," Caroline answered. "He departed immediately after his performance. He had another engagement in London. Most unfortunate. I should have liked to speak with him." Poirot's tone was casual, but Miss Whitmore caught something in it. "Why would you need to speak with the pianist?" "Ah, mademoiselle, in cases such as these, every detail may prove significant. Now, if you would be so kind as to show me this music room." The music room proved to be a revelation, dominated by a magnificent Steinway grand piano. It was clearly Caroline's domain. Sheet music was arranged with meticulous care, and the instrument itself gleamed like black lacquer in the morning light streaming through tall windows. "Beautiful," Poirot murmured, approaching the piano with obvious admiration. "You play often, Mademoiselle Caroline?" "Daily. Music is my greatest passion." Her fingers traced the keys lovingly. "This particular piano has been in our family for 30 years. I know every note it can produce. And last evening both you and the professional played this same instrument." "Yes, though I was not entirely pleased about sharing." Caroline's honesty was refreshing. "Signor Marcello is competent, but he lacks sensitivity to the instrument's particular qualities." Poirot continued his examination of the piano, running his hands along its surfaces with the delicacy of a craftsman. "Tell me what pieces were performed." "I played Chopin, several nocturnes. Then Signor Marcello performed some operatic pieces, Italian mostly, rather dramatic for my taste." "And the guests, they enjoyed the music?" "Certainly, though there was some discussion about one piece Signor Marcello played, a song that wasn't on his planned program." Miss Whitmore looked puzzled. "I don't remember anything unusual." Caroline's smile was enigmatic. "Perhaps you were otherwise engaged, dear Celeste. But some of us noticed." The detective's eyes sharpened with interest. Already this case was proving far more complex than a simple theft. Chapter 3. The Music of Secrets. Poirot continued his meticulous examination of the music room. While the morning light grew stronger through the tall windows, he noticed that Caroline watched his every movement with barely concealed fascination, while Miss Whitmore appeared increasingly anxious as the hours passed toward her wedding ceremony. "This song that was not on the program," Poirot said casually, running his finger along the piano's music stand. "What made it so notable?" Caroline exchanged a glance with her brother Richard, who had joined them in the music room. "It was an unusual choice for a wedding celebration." "In what way unusual?" "La donna è mobile," Richard said tersely. Woman is fickle, hardly appropriate for an engagement celebration. Miss Whitmore frowned. I don't recall Signor Marcello playing that piece. You were speaking with father at the time, Caroline observed. About the shipping contracts, I believe. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Ah yes, the business discussions. They were frequent during the evening. Father conducts business at all hours, Richard replied with obvious irritation. The Ashworth Shipping Company doesn't pause for social occasions, and these contracts under negotiation, they are significant, extremely. We're competing for exclusive trading rights with several continental firms. The negotiations have been intense. Mrs. Fleming appeared in the doorway. Excuse me, Miss Whitmore, but your maid is asking for you. Something about your wedding dress, I believe. Oh yes, of course. Miss Whitmore looked at Poirot apologetically. I really must see to the preparations. The ceremony is in just a few hours. Naturellement, mademoiselle. Perhaps while you attend to these matters, I might speak with the household staff. Sometimes the servants observe details that escape the attention of guests. Certainly, Richard agreed, though his tone suggested reluctance. Mrs. Fleming can arrange whatever you need. As Miss Whitmore hurried away, Poirot turned his attention to the piano bench. It was an elegant piece with a hinged seat that opened to reveal storage for sheet music. He lifted the lid and found it neatly organized with Caroline's compositions and arrangements. You compose as well as perform, Mademoiselle Caroline. Occasionally. Nothing of great merit, I'm afraid. Her modesty seemed genuine, though Poirot detected pride beneath it. And last evening you played only your planned pieces. Yes, though I was tempted to improvise when Signor Marcello took such liberties with his program. Richard moved restlessly toward the windows. Caroline, surely these details can't matter now. We should be focusing on finding the ring, not discussing musical programs. Au contraire, Monsieur Richard. In my experience, the seemingly insignificant details often prove most illuminating. Poirot closed the piano bench carefully. Now, Mrs. Fleming, perhaps you could arrange for me to speak with the staff who served dinner last evening. The housekeeper's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Certainly, sir. Though I'm sure none of our people would ever. Mais non, I make no accusations. I simply gather information, like a fisherman casting his net wide. Mrs. Fleming led him to the servants' hall, where the staff who had worked the previous evening were assembled. Poirot's gentle questioning revealed little of apparent significance. The dinner had proceeded smoothly. The guests had been well behaved. Nothing unusual had been observed. However, when he spoke privately with Jenny, Miss Whitmore's personal maid, a different picture began to emerge. Jenny was a slight young woman of perhaps 20, with worried eyes and work-worn hands. She twisted her apron nervously as Poirot questioned her about the previous evening. Miss Whitmore seemed happy during dinner, Jenny said carefully, though she did excuse herself once during the main course. Oh, for what purpose? She said she needed to fetch something from her room. A handkerchief, I think. How long was she absent? Perhaps 10 minutes, sir. No more than that. And when she returned, you noticed nothing different about her manner. Jenny hesitated. Well, sir, she did seem a bit flustered, and she kept touching her ring after that, as if to make sure it was still there. Most interesting. Poirot made a mental note to explore this detail further. Tell me, Jenny, you have been with Miss Whitmore long? 2 years, sir. She's been very kind to me, despite your financial difficulties. The girl's face crumpled slightly. She told you about that? Oh, sir, I would never. I mean, I know what people might think, but I would never steal from Miss Whitmore. Never. Of course not, Poirot soothed. But these difficulties, they are serious. It's my mother, sir. She's been poorly, and the doctor's bills. Jenny's voice trailed off. How much is required? Nearly £50, sir. It might as well be 50,000 for all the chance I have of raising it. £50, a considerable sum for a servant, but hardly worth stealing a £3,000 ring, unless, of course, the theft was intended to appear as someone else's work. Jenny, when Miss Whitmore discovered the ring missing, what exactly did she do? She went quite pale, sir, searched through all her jewelry, checked the floor, everywhere. Then she said she had to go to London immediately to seek help. She did not suspect anyone in particular. Another hesitation. Well, sir, She did ask me if I'd seen anyone near her room during the evening, but I hadn't, truly. Poirot patted the girl's shoulder kindly. Thank you, Jenny. You have been most helpful. As he made his way back through the manor's corridors, the detective's mind organized the information he had gathered. The pattern was not yet clear, but certain elements were beginning to suggest possibilities he had not initially considered. He found Miss Whitmore in her room, being helped into her wedding dress by Jenny. The gown was magnificent, ivory silk with intricate beadwork that must have cost a fortune, but the bride's face was pale with anxiety. Monsieur Poirot, she said the moment she saw him, please tell me you've discovered something, anything. I have learned several interesting details, mademoiselle, but I fear I must ask you a rather personal question. Jenny looked uncertainly between them, and Miss Whitmore nodded for her to leave them alone. Last evening, Poirot continued once they had privacy, you left the dinner table during the main course. For what purpose? Miss Whitmore's hands stilled on her dress. I needed to fetch something from my room. A handkerchief, according to your maid. Yes, that's right. But Poirot detected the slight tremor in her voice that suggested otherwise. Mademoiselle, I must ask again for complete honesty. The truth, however uncomfortable, is essential if I am to recover your ring. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then slowly, she sank into a chair, her magnificent dress pooling around her. I went to my room to think, to be alone for a few minutes. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The evening was so overwhelming, everyone watching me, expecting me to be radiantly happy. And I was, truly, I was. But sometimes, the magnitude of what you are undertaking becomes frightening. She nodded gratefully. Exactly. Marriage is such an enormous step, and the Ashworths, they're not like other families. There are expectations, responsibilities, and when you returned to dinner, I felt better, more composed, ready to continue with the evening. But something in her manner suggested there was more to this story than she was revealing. Poirot decided not to press further yet. Time was running short, and he had other avenues to explore. The clock in the hallway was already striking noon. Chapter 4. What the Piano Witnessed. With only 3 hours remaining before the wedding ceremony, Poirot knew he needed to accelerate his investigation. He returned to the music room, drawn by an instinct he couldn't quite explain. Something about the piano continued to intrigue him. Caroline was there, practicing scales with mechanical precision. Her fingers moved across the keys with practiced ease, but her attention seemed elsewhere. She looked up when Poirot entered. Still investigating our musical corner, Monsieur Poirot? I would have thought the dining room more relevant to your inquiry. In crimes involving missing objects, mademoiselle, one must consider not only where the item disappeared, but where it might have been taken. You think someone hid the ring in here? Caroline's tone was skeptical. Perhaps. The music room was visited by all the guests during the evening. None. It would provide opportunity for concealment. I suppose so, though I can't imagine where anyone would hide something in here. I know every inch of this room. Poirot approached the piano again, running his hands along its polished surface. This is a remarkable instrument. You said it has been in your family for 30 years. Yes, a gift from my grandfather when I was 12. It was the beginning of my serious musical education, and it has never been, how do you say, opened for tuning or repair. Of course it has. Mr. Hartley comes from London twice yearly for maintenance, but he's been the family's piano tuner for decades, completely trustworthy. When was he here last? Caroline paused in her playing. Actually, just last week. Father insisted the piano be in perfect condition for the wedding celebrations. Poirot continued his examination, paying particular attention to the instrument's construction. The Steinway was indeed magnificent, its ebony surface reflecting the room like a dark mirror. But it was more than its beauty that captured his attention, it was its possibilities. Tell me again about Signor Marcello's performance. This piece he played that was not on the program, La Donna Immobile. You are certain Miss Whitmore did not hear it? Quite certain. She had left to speak with father in his study, about the shipping business, as I mentioned. And how did the other guests react to this musical choice? Caroline's hands stilled on the keys. There was some discomfort. Several people exchanged glances.
It seemed rather pointed, given the occasion. Pointed in what way? Well, the song is about the fickleness of women. Hardly a complimentary choice for an engagement celebration, unless, Poirot mused, the performer intended to convey a particular message. What sort of message? Before Poirot could respond, Richard appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with agitation. Monsieur Poirot, surely you have more pressing matters to investigate than my sister's musical recollections. The ceremony begins in less than 3 hours, and we're no closer to finding Celeste's ring. Patience, monsieur. Sometimes the solution to a mystery requires understanding the complete picture, not merely focusing on the missing piece. But the ring will be found, I assure you. But first I must understand why it disappeared. Richard stared at him. What do you mean, why? It was stolen, obviously. Was it? Or perhaps it was hidden. Hidden, by whom? And why would anyone hide it? Those, Monsieur Richard, are exactly the questions I am endeavouring to answer. As if summoned by their conversation, Miss Whitmore appeared in the doorway. She had changed from her wedding dress into a simple day gown, and her face was pale with anxiety. Monsieur Poirot, please, I'm desperate. The ceremony is so close, and without the ring. Her voice broke slightly. Mademoiselle, I believe I am very close to understanding what occurred last evening. But I must ask you once more, are you certain you have told me everything? Every detail, however small it might seem. She met his gaze steadily. I've told you everything relevant to finding my ring. Ah, but relevance, it is a subjective thing. None. What seems unimportant to you might be crucial to me. I don't understand what more you could need to know. Poirot studied her carefully. There was something in her manner, a controlled desperation that suggested knowledge she was unwilling to share. Very well. Then perhaps it is time for a demonstration. A demonstration. If you would be so kind as to gather everyone who was present last evening, the family, the staff, all who remain at the manor. Richard frowned. Surely you don't intend some sort of dramatic revelation. This isn't a stage play, Monsieur Poirot. Non, monsieur, this is real life. But sometimes real life requires a bit of theatre to reveal the truth. Within 20 minutes they had assembled in the music room. Sir Edmund Ashworth, a distinguished gentleman in his 60s, had emerged from his study with obvious reluctance. Mrs. Fleming stood with the household staff, her expression carefully neutral. Jenny clutched her hands nervously, while Caroline remained seated at the piano bench with an air of amused interest. Ladies and gentlemen, Poirot began, I have called you together because I believe I understand what happened to Miss Whitmore's ring. But to explain, I must first tell you a story about music, and secrets, and the power of truth.
He moved to stand beside the piano, his hand resting lightly on its polished surface. This beautiful instrument witnessed something last evening, something that explains not only the disappearance of the ring, but the reason for that disappearance. Miss Whitmore had grown very pale. Monsieur Poirot, surely we don't need all these people present for— Ah, but we do, mademoiselle, because this is not simply about a missing ring, it is about a truth that someone hoped would remain hidden. The detective's green eyes surveyed the assembled group with characteristic intensity. You see, I have discovered something most interesting about this piano, something that I believe will explain everything. With deliberate ceremony he moved to the piano bench and lifted its hinged seat. The sheet music Caroline stored there was visible to everyone present, but Poirot reached deeper into the compartment, his hands searching carefully. Ah, he murmured with satisfaction, just as I suspected. And from the depths of the piano bench he withdrew a small object that glittered in the afternoon light. Miss Whitmore's engagement ring. The room erupted in shocked exclamations, but Poirot raised his hand for silence. His eyes were fixed on Miss Whitmore's face, reading the complex emotions that flickered there. Relief, certainly, but also something else. Something that looked very much like guilt. Chapter 5. The Truth Behind the Music. The sight of the ring emerging from the piano bench created a moment of stunned silence, followed by an explosion of voices. Richard stepped forward, relief and confusion warring in his expression. Thank God, but how did it get there? Who could have? Patience, monsieur, Poirot said, holding the ring up to catch the light. The recovery is only the beginning of our story. Now we must understand how it came to be in this particular hiding place. Miss Whitmore reached for the ring, but Poirot drew his hand back slightly. "Un moment, mademoiselle, there are questions that must be answered first." Her face went very white. "Questions, but you've found it. Surely that's all that matters." "On the contrary, it matters very much how it came to be hidden in a place that only one person in this room could access without detection." Caroline rose slowly from the piano bench, her dark eyes fixed on Poirot with new wariness. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting, Mademoiselle Caroline, that you know more about this ring's disappearance than you have admitted." "That's absurd," Richard interrupted. "Caroline would never what, monsieur? Steal? Non. I do not believe your sister is a thief, but she might have other reasons for concealing this ring." Sir Edmund Ashworth stepped forward, his face grave. "Monsieur Poirot, I must insist you explain yourself clearly. These insinuations are based on careful observation and logical deduction." Poirot replied firmly. "Consider the facts. The ring was found in a hiding place accessible only to someone with intimate knowledge of this piano. Mademoiselle Caroline herself told us she knows every inch of this instrument. More significantly, it was hidden in a compartment that would require lifting the piano bench, something that would appear perfectly natural for Caroline to do, but suspicious for anyone else." Caroline had gone very still, her hands clasped tightly before her. "You're suggesting I stole Celeste's ring?" "Non, mademoiselle, I am suggesting you found it." The distinction created another moment of confused silence. Miss Whitmore swayed slightly, and Jenny stepped forward to steady her. "Found it?" Richard demanded. "What do you mean, found it?" Poirot's eyes never left Miss Whitmore's face. "I mean that sometime during last evening's festivities, Miss Whitmore removed her own ring, and placed it somewhere she thought it would be safe, but when she went to retrieve it, it was gone." "That's ridiculous," Miss Whitmore whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it? Let us examine what we know. You left the dinner table during the main course, not for a handkerchief, as you told your maid, but for some other purpose. When you returned, you began repeatedly touching your ring finger, as if to assure yourself the ring was still there, but was it?" The silence stretched painfully. Finally, Miss Whitmore's shoulders sagged in defeat. "How did you know?" "Several things suggested the truth, mademoiselle. Your excessive concern about involving the police, not merely about scandal, but about questions that might reveal embarrassing truths. Your insistence that the ring be found before the ceremony, suggesting you knew exactly where it should be, and most tellingly your certainty that it had been stolen, a curious assumption unless you had reason to believe someone had taken it from where you had placed it." Richard stared at his fiancée in bewilderment. "Celeste, what is he talking about? Why would you hide your own ring?" Miss Whitmore looked around the room at the assembled faces, some sympathetic, others shocked, all waiting for her explanation. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I was frightened." "Frightened of what?" "Of the truth that ring represented, of what I would discover if I kept wearing it." The cryptic response only deepened the confusion, but Poirot nodded as if it made perfect sense. "Ah, yes, the truth about your engagement, about your fiancé's past, about why Signor Marcello chose to play La Donna e Mobile at your celebration." Richard went very pale. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the fact that Signor Marcello was not merely a hired pianist, but someone who knew you personally, someone who chose that particular song as a message, a warning to your fiancé about your character." Sir Edmund's face darkened with anger. "This is preposterous. My son's reputation has been carefully maintained despite certain indiscretions," Poirot continued calmly, "but Miss Whitmore began to suspect there were things about her fiancé she did not know, things that would matter very much to a woman wearing her grandmother's ring as a symbol of family honor and lasting love." Miss Whitmore was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "I went to my room during dinner because I needed to think. The song, when I heard it earlier in the evening, during the cocktails, it made me remember something, a conversation I'd overheard at a party months ago, about Richard and other women." "Celeste," Richard's voice was sharp with warning. "No, Richard, it's time for the truth. She looked around the room with desperate courage. I realized I was marrying a man I didn't really know, so I hid the ring temporarily, intending to retrieve it only if I decided to go through with the ceremony. And when you went to retrieve it, it was gone. I thought I'd hidden it safely, but someone had found it. Poirot turned to Caroline, whose face had gone ashen. And you, mademoiselle, what happened when you discovered the ring in its hiding place? Caroline's composure finally cracked. I was practicing after dinner, alone in here. I opened the bench to get some sheet music, and there it was. I knew immediately what it meant, that Celeste was having doubts about the marriage. So you decided to help those doubts along. I decided to give her time to think, to force her to confront her feelings without the pressure of that ring symbolizing expectations and family honor. So you hid it here, in your piano bench, thinking what exactly? Richard's voice was rising with anger and confusion. Caroline lifted her chin defiantly. I thought if she couldn't find it, she'd have to postpone the wedding, give herself time to think clearly about what she was doing. You had no right, Miss Whitmore cried. That ring means everything to me, does it? Or does it represent chains you're afraid to break? Caroline's response was sharp. I've watched you these past months, Celeste. You're not happy, you're terrified. Sir Edmund stepped forward, his face thunderous. Caroline, how dare you interfere in your brother's engagement? Because someone had to protect her from making the biggest mistake of her life. The room erupted in arguments, but Poirot's voice cut through the chaos with quiet authority. Silence, s'il vous plaît. We have not yet heard the complete truth. All eyes turned back to him. He still held the ring, turning it slowly in his fingers so the sapphire caught the light. You see, there is one more element to this story that has not been revealed. Mademoiselle Caroline, you were not the only one who knew where Miss Whitmore had hidden her ring. Caroline frowned. What do you mean? I mean that someone else discovered its hiding place before you did. Someone who moved it to your piano bench to implicate you in its disappearance. The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Miss Whitmore stared at Poirot in shock. That's impossible. No one else knew where I put it. Ah, but that is where you are wrong, mademoiselle. One other person had both opportunity and motive to discover your secret. Someone who has been watching you very carefully, who knows your habits and your fears. Poirot's eyes swept the assembled group before settling on a figure who had remained quietly in the background throughout the revelations, someone who needed to ensure that any suspicion would fall elsewhere, someone who has been in desperate financial straits and saw an opportunity that was too tempting to resist. His gaze fixed on Jenny, who had grown deathly pale. "Non, monsieur," Jenny whispered. I wouldn't, but you did see where Miss Whitmore hid the ring, did you not? When she went to her room during dinner, you followed as any good lady's maid would do when her mistress seemed distressed. Jenny's composure crumbled completely. I was only trying to help. She seemed so upset, and you thought to see what was troubling her, and you witnessed her hiding the ring. Later, when the house was quiet, you retrieved it, intending to sell it to pay your mother's medical expenses, but then you realized the theft would be discovered too quickly. Suspicion would fall on you as the obvious suspect, so she moved it to Caroline's piano bench. Miss Whitmore said slowly, understanding dawning in her voice. Exactement. A brilliant plan, really. If the ring were found there, suspicion would fall on Mademoiselle Caroline, who had both access and a possible motive to disrupt the wedding. Jenny would appear as innocent as anyone else. Jenny was sobbing now, her slight frame shaking with the force of her emotion. My mother is dying. The doctors say she has perhaps weeks left, but the medicine costs so much money. I thought, if I could just borrow the ring for a few days, sell it, then report it as stolen from somewhere else. But Miss Whitmore's immediate departure for London to seek help disrupted your plans, Poirot continued gently. You had to abandon the theft and settle for misdirection instead. I put it in Miss Caroline's piano bench because I knew she would find it eventually, Jenny admitted through her tears. I thought it would just look like Miss Whitmore had hidden it there herself, or that Miss Caroline had taken it to stop the wedding. I never meant for anyone to be blamed. Mrs. Fleming stepped forward, her face a mask of professional disapproval mixed with genuine sadness. Jenny, how could you, after all Miss Whitmore's kindness to you? But Miss Whitmore was looking at her maid with an expression of profound compassion rather than anger. £50 for your mother's medicine. Jenny nodded miserably. Why didn't you simply ask me for help? I would have given you the money gladly. I couldn't, miss. You've already done so much for me. I couldn't bear to ask for more, especially with your wedding and all the expenses. The room fell silent except for Jenny's quiet weeping. Finally Miss Whitmore turned to Poirot. So the mystery is solved. Jenny took my ring intending to steal it, then lost her nerve and hid it in Caroline's piano bench to avoid suspicion. The mystery of the ring's location is solved, Poirot agreed, but the greater mystery remains. What greater mystery? Poirot looked at her steadily. The mystery of why you hid it in the first place. The question of whether you truly wished to marry Monsieur Richard, knowing what you now know about his character. The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes were on Miss Whitmore, who stood frozen in the center of the room, the weight of decision written plainly on her face. The clock in the hallway began to chime 2 o'clock, 1 hour until the wedding ceremony. Chapter 6. The song that revealed everything. The chiming of the clock seemed to galvanize everyone in the room. Sir Edmund consulted his pocket watch with obvious agitation. 1 hour, he announced unnecessarily. The guests will be arriving at the church shortly, but Miss Whitmore seemed frozen, staring at the ring in Poirot's palm, as if it were a serpent rather than a symbol of love. The little detective studied her face with those penetrating green eyes that seemed to see into the very soul. Mademoiselle, he said gently, perhaps it would be beneficial if we understood exactly what this Signor Marcello meant to convey with his musical choice. You mentioned recognizing something, a conversation you had overheard. Richard stepped forward sharply. That's quite enough, Monsieur Poirot. You found the ring. Jenny has confessed to taking it, and the matter is settled. We need to prepare for the ceremony. Ah, but is it settled, monsieur? Your fiancé seems to have some remaining concerns. Miss Whitmore looked up at her betrothed, and for the first time since Poirot had met her, he saw strength in her expression rather than anxious uncertainty. Richard, I need to know about Signor Marcello. How do you know him? I don't know him. He was simply the pianist Caroline hired for the evening. That's not true, Caroline interrupted quietly. I didn't hire him, Richard. You did. The lie hung in the air between them like a poisonous cloud. Richard's face flushed, then went pale. Caroline, you're mistaken. No, I'm not. You specifically requested that we engage Signor Marcello for the evening. You said he was highly recommended. Recommended? By whom? Miss Whitmore's voice was steady now, gaining strength with each revelation. Poirot stepped forward slightly. Perhaps, Monsieur Richard, you would care to explain your acquaintance with the gentleman, because I believe Miss Whitmore is beginning to understand the significance of that particular musical selection. I don't owe anyone explanations about you. Owe me an explanation, Miss Whitmore said firmly. I'm supposed to marry you in 1 hour, Richard. I deserve to know who you really are. The room had grown very quiet. Even Jenny's sobbing had subsided, as everyone waited for Richard's response. When he remained silent, Miss Whitmore turned to Caroline. You know something, don't you, about Richard and this pianist? Caroline glanced at her brother, and something passed between them, a look of old secrets and family loyalty tested to its limits. Tell her, Sir Edmund said quietly from his position near the window. His voice carried the weight of paternal authority, and something else, disappointment perhaps. Father, Richard began. Tell her, Richard, if you're to be married, she deserves to know the truth. Richard ran his hands through his hair, destroying its careful arrangement. When he looked up, his face was haggard. I knew Marcello in Italy, 3 years ago, when the family sent me abroad for a time. Why did they send you abroad? Miss Whitmore asked, though her tone suggested she was beginning to suspect the answer. There was a scandal, Richard said finally. A married woman. Her husband challenged me to a duel, which was ridiculous in this day and age, but the newspapers got hold of the story. Father thought it best if I traveled for a while until the gossip died down. And Signor Marcello was the woman's music teacher. He knew about our affair, knew how it ended. Miss Whitmore was very still. How did it end, Richard? She left her husband for me. I let her believe we would be married, but you didn't marry her. No, I couldn't. The social differences were too great. Father made it clear that such a marriage would result in my disinheritance. So you abandoned her.
Richard's silence was answer enough. Poirot spoke into the quiet that followed, and Signor Marcello played La Donna Immobile. Woman is fickle, as a warning to you, mademoiselle, not about women's fickleness, but about this man's. Miss Whitmore turned to face her fiancé, and when she spoke her voice was calm and clear. Is she the only one, Richard? The only woman you've treated this way? Celeste, that was years ago. I'm a different man now. Are you? Because at Lady Morrison's garden party last month, I overheard two women discussing a recent scandal involving you and a young actress. Something about promises made and broken. The color drained completely from Richard's face. Who told you that? It doesn't matter who told me. What matters is whether it's true. I can explain. No, Miss Whitmore said firmly. I don't think you can, not in any way that would matter. She turned to Poirot and extended her hand. May I have my ring back, please? Poirot placed it gently in her palm. What will you do with it, mademoiselle? She looked down at the sapphire and diamonds that had adorned her grandmother's hand, then her mother's, and for a brief time, her own. I'm going to honor what it represents. Truth, fidelity and love that lasts. Things that apparently my fiancé doesn't understand. Celeste, please. Richard stepped toward her, desperation clear in his voice. We can work through this. I love you. Do you, or do you love my inheritance, my family's connections, the respectability our marriage would bring to your reputation? When he didn't answer, she nodded, as if he had confirmed her suspicions. I thought so. She turned to face the assembled group. There will be no wedding today. Sir Edmund closed his eyes briefly, whether in relief or resignation, Poirot couldn't tell. Caroline looked between her brother and Miss Whitmore with an expression of profound sadness. Celeste, Caroline said softly, I'm sorry, I should have told you sooner about Richard's history. I hoped he had changed. So did I. But some men never change. They simply become better at hiding who they really are. Mrs. Fleming stepped forward with practical efficiency. Shall I send word to the church, Miss Whitmore, and to the guests? Yes, please. Tell them there's been a family emergency, and the ceremony must be postponed indefinitely. Richard made one last desperate attempt. Celeste, you're making a terrible mistake. We're suited for each other, our families, our social positions, yes, but not our characters. She looked at him with what might have been pity. Goodbye, Richard. With dignity that belied her youth, Miss Whitmore walked from the room, her grandmother's ring clutched safely in her hand. As the door closed behind her, Poirot turned his attention to Jenny, who was still standing miserably in the corner. And now, mademoiselle, we must decide what to do about your situation. Jenny looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. I know I'll go to prison. I deserve it. Perhaps, but I think there might be another solution to your mother's medical expenses. After all, there will be no wedding today, which means no need for a lady's maid to assist with the ceremony. He glanced meaningfully at Sir Edmund, who understood immediately. Quite right, Jenny. Your mistress will undoubtedly wish to reward your years of faithful service. I'm sure arrangements can be made for your mother's care. Hope flickered in Jenny's eyes for the first time since her confession. Thank you, sir. Oh, thank you. As the various parties dispersed to deal with the practical matters of cancelling a wedding, Poirot remained in the music room, running his fingers thoughtfully over the piano keys. Caroline approached him, her expression troubled. Do you think I did the right thing, Monsieur Poirot, hiding the ring where I did? I think, mademoiselle, that sometimes the truth finds a way to reveal itself, regardless of our efforts to conceal or expose it. Miss Whitmore needed to discover her fiancé's true character. You simply provided the catalyst. And Richard, Poirot shrugged eloquently. Some men learn from their mistakes. Others are doomed to repeat them. Time will tell which category your brother occupies. He moved toward the door, then paused. Mademoiselle, Caroline, that piece you mentioned, La Donna Immobile, it has another verse, does it not, about the man who learns too late that constancy is the greatest virtue? Caroline nodded. Perhaps Signor Marcello chose his message more carefully than anyone realized. Chapter 7, Echoes of the Past. 3 days later, Poirot sat in his Baker Street lodgings, reviewing the final details of the Ashworth case in his precise handwriting. The newspapers had carried a brief notice about the postponement of the Whitmore-Ashworth wedding due to a family emergency, but the true story had been kept from public scrutiny. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. His landlady announced that Miss Whitmore requested to see him. She entered looking remarkably composed for a woman who had cancelled her wedding 72 hours earlier. She wore a simple travelling dress and carried a small valise. "Monsieur Poirot, I wanted to thank you properly before I departed for the continent." "Ah, you are taking the grand tour, mademoiselle?" "Something like that. I've decided to visit my mother's relatives in France. I need time to think about my future without the pressure of London society's expectations." She settled into the chair across from his desk, and Poirot noticed she wore her grandmother's ring on her right hand rather than her left. "I also wanted to apologize for not being completely honest with you during your investigation. You were protecting yourself, mademoiselle. It is understandable, perhaps, but you deserve to know the whole truth." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When I hid the ring during the dinner, it wasn't just because of the song Signor Marcello played. It was because of something else I'd discovered that afternoon." Poirot leaned forward with interest. "Indeed, I was in Richard's study, looking for writing paper, when I found a letter from a solicitor in Italy, about a woman named Isabella Rossetti. Ah, the married woman from his past. She died, Monsieur Poirot, 6 months ago, in poverty, with an infant daughter." Miss Whitmore's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "She never married after Richard abandoned her. The letter was informing him of her death, and asking if he would acknowledge paternity of the child." The revelation struck Poirot like a physical blow. Even in his extensive experience with human nature's darker aspects, such callousness still had the power to shock him. And Monsieur Richard's response to this information? There was a draft of his reply in the same folder. He denied any responsibility, and instructed the solicitor never to contact him again. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured. "A child left orphaned while her father enjoys the privileges of English society. That's why I really hid the ring. I needed time to decide whether I could marry a man capable of such cruelty." When I heard Signor Marcello's musical warning, I knew the pianist understood Richard's true character better than I had. "And you have decided what to do about this child?" Miss Whitmore smiled for the first time since entering his rooms. "Isabella's daughter is being cared for by nuns in a convent near Florence. I've arranged to visit her during my travels. If she's truly Richard's child, you would consider adoption. I have more than enough resources to provide for her properly, and she deserves better than a life of poverty because of her father's abandonment." Poirot regarded her with profound admiration. "You are a remarkable young woman, Mademoiselle Whitmore. I'm trying to be the woman my grandmother-in-law taught me to become, the kind of woman worthy of wearing this ring." She rose to leave, then paused at the door. "There's one more thing, Monsieur Poirot, about Jenny. Yes, I've arranged for her mother's medical care, as Sir Edmund suggested, but I've also offered Jenny a position managing my charitable foundation. She has a good heart, despite her moment of desperation. Magnifique. And Mademoiselle Caroline has written to apologize for her interference, though I've told her no apology is necessary. She may have saved me from making the greatest mistake of my life." After Miss Whitmore departed, Poirot sat contemplating the complexities of human nature. His mind wandered to another loose thread in the case. Signor Marcello's role in the evening's events. As if summoned by his thoughts, his landlady appeared again to announce another visitor. This time, it was a distinguished gentleman with dark hair and intelligent eyes, carrying a musician's case. "Monsieur Poirot, I am Giuseppe Marcello. I believe you wish to speak with me about the events at Ashworth Manor." "Indeed, Signor Marcello. Please, be seated. I have been most curious about your musical selection that evening." The pianist set down his case, and took the offered chair. "I heard from Caroline Ashworth that the wedding was cancelled. I confess I am not entirely surprised. You knew Monsieur Richard well in Italy, well enough to understand his character. When I learned he was to marry an innocent young woman from a respectable family, I felt I had a moral obligation to warn her." Through the medium of song, Marcello smiled slightly. "Music can convey truths that words cannot safely speak, especially when one is a foreigner with no social standing against a powerful English family. Tell me about Isabella Rossetti." The pianist's expression grew somber. a talented young woman with dreams of opera. Richard pursued her relentlessly, convinced her to leave her husband, promised her marriage and a new life in England. But when the time came to honor those promises, he disappeared, left Italy without a word to her. She spent the last years of her life believing he would return for her and their daughter. You knew about the child. I was present at her birth. Isabella asked me to be the little one's godfather. Marcello's voice carried deep emotion. When Isabella died, I tried to contact Richard about his daughter. His response was, not what one would hope from a man of supposed honor. So you accepted the engagement to play at his wedding celebration as an opportunity for justice, for truth. Monsieur Poirot, Miss Whitmore deserved to know what kind of man she was marrying. I chose my musical message carefully, hoping she would understand its significance. And now I return to Italy, with a lighter heart, knowing I have done what I could for Isabella's memory, and for her daughter's future, thanks to Miss Whitmore's generosity. After Marcello departed, Poirot reflected on the curious way justice had been served in this case, not through the courts or formal punishment, but through the exposure of character, and the triumph of conscience over convenience. He picked up his pen to add a final note to his case file. Truth, like music, finds a way to be heard regardless of those who would silence it. The late afternoon sun streamed through his windows, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear the faint sound of a piano being played. The melody was unfamiliar, but somehow it seemed to speak of redemption and hope. It was, he thought, a much more suitable song for new beginnings than La Donna, a mobile had been for endings.
Chapter 8. The Weight of Secrets. A week had passed since the events at Ashworth Manor when Poirot received an unexpected letter bearing the Ashworth family crest. The elegant stationery contained an invitation from Sir Edmund requesting a private meeting to discuss matters of mutual interest. Curious, Poirot made his way to the Ashworth London residence, a stately townhouse in Belgravia that spoke of generations of wealth and influence. Sir Edmund received him in his study, a room lined with maritime paintings and ship models that reflected the family's shipping empire. Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming. Sir Edmund appeared to have aged considerably in the past week. I find myself in need of your expertise once again. Indeed, how may I be of service? The older man moved to his desk and withdrew a thick folder. It concerns my son Richard. Since the unpleasantness of last week, certain information has come to light. Information that suggests his character flaws may extend beyond romantic indiscretions. Poirot settled into the offered chair, his interest piqued. What sort of information? Financial irregularities in the shipping company's accounts, specifically in the Continental Trading Division that Richard manages. Embezzlement, possibly, or fraud. The amounts involved are substantial enough to seriously damage the company's reputation if they become public knowledge. Sir Edmund opened the folder and spread several documents across his desk. Even from his position across the room, Poirot could see columns of figures, correspondence, and what appeared to be forged signatures. When did you discover these discrepancies? Our chief accountant brought them to my attention yesterday. He'd been conducting a routine audit when he noticed several suspicious transactions dating back over the past year. And you suspect Richard is responsible? Sir Edmund's silence was answer enough. After a moment he spoke with evident pain. I've spent my entire life building this company, Monsieur Poirot. My father and grandfather before me dedicated their lives to establishing the Ashworth name as synonymous with integrity and maritime commerce. The thought that my son might have... He couldn't finish the sentence. Where is Monsieur Richard now? That's part of the problem. He left London the morning after the cancelled wedding, ostensibly to visit friends in Scotland, but now I wonder if he knew this investigation was coming. Poirot studied the documents Sir Edmund had spread before him. The pattern that emerged was one of systematic fraud, fictitious cargo manifests, inflated shipping costs and payments to non-existent continental suppliers. This Signor Benedetti, who signed several of these invoices, Poirot observed, the signature appears somewhat irregular. Our Italian correspondent has never heard of him. The invoices appear to be complete fabrications, and the amounts involved, nearly £50,000 over the past 18 months, a staggering sum, enough to ruin the company if the fraud became public knowledge, and more than enough to fund a lavish lifestyle or pay gambling debts. Sir Edmund, have you considered that perhaps your son's romantic entanglements were not merely matters of the heart but financial necessities? The older man looked puzzled. What do you mean? A man who lives beyond his means must find resources somewhere. Perhaps Monsieur Richard's pursuit of wealthy young women was motivated by more than mere affection. The suggestion struck Sir Edmund like a physical blow. You're saying he courted Miss Whitmore for her inheritance? It would explain his determination to proceed with a marriage that clearly troubled his bride. A man truly in love might have been more concerned with his fiancée's happiness than with reaching the altar at any cost. Sir Edmund sank into his chair, looking every one of his 60-plus years. What am I to do, Monsieur Poirot, if this becomes public? First we must determine the full extent of the fraud, then we must locate your son before he disappears entirely with whatever funds he may have embezzled. I've already sent telegrams to the Scottish estate where he claimed to be visiting. They haven't seen him. Then we must cast our net wider. A man with Richard's habits and resources has limited options for disappearing. The railway stations, the ports, the banks, all must be watched. As they discussed the practical aspects of tracking down a fraudulent heir, Poirot's mind was working on a deeper level. The events at Ashworth Manor had revealed more than just Richard's romantic faithlessness. They had exposed a man whose entire life was built on deception. There is one more possibility we must consider, Poirot said carefully. What's that? That your son anticipated this discovery and has already taken steps to protect himself. The timing of his departure so soon after the wedding scandal suggests planning rather than impulse. Sir Edmund's face went grey. You think he's fled the country? It is possible. A man facing disgrace and imprisonment might choose exile over justice. Before Sir Edmund could respond, there was a knock at the study door. Caroline Ashworth entered, her face grave with concern. Father, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been a telegram from the bank. She handed him a folded paper with obvious reluctance. Sir Edmund read it quickly, and his face went from grey to white. What is it? Poirot asked. Richard emptied his personal accounts yesterday. Withdrew everything in cash, nearly £20,000. Caroline moved closer to her father's chair. There's more, isn't there? About the company accounts? Sir Edmund nodded grimly. Monsieur Poirot, I fear we may be too late. If Richard has access to £20,000 in cash plus whatever he may have embezzled from the company, he could disappear entirely. Poirot finished. But perhaps not. A man carrying that much money attracts attention. He must have a plan for where to go and how to establish himself. The continental connections, Caroline said suddenly. All those business trips to Italy and France. He could have been preparing for this possibility for months. Poirot rose from his chair, his mind already racing ahead to the next steps in their investigation. Mademoiselle Caroline, you may have provided the key insight. If your brother has been planning this escape for months, he would have needed assistance, false documents, safe houses, perhaps confederates to help establish a new identity. But how do we find him? We follow the money, mademoiselle, and we follow the pattern of his previous deceptions. A man like your brother rarely abandons his methods simply because he changes his location. Sir Edmund looked between them with something approaching hope. You believe he can be found? I believe, Poirot said with quiet confidence, that Richard Ashworth's greatest weakness, his arrogance, will prove to be his downfall. He believes himself too clever to be caught. That very confidence will make him careless. As they began to plan their strategy for tracking down the fugitive heir, none of them could imagine just how prescient that observation would prove to be. Chapter 9. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. The pursuit of Richard Ashworth took Poirot and Caroline across the Channel to France, following a trail of clues that led from London banks to Parisian hotels to the vineyards of Burgundy. Sir Edmund remained in London to manage the crisis at the shipping company, working desperately to prevent news of the embezzlement from reaching the financial press. Their first breakthrough came at the Dover ferry terminal, where a ticket clerk remembered selling passage to a gentleman matching Richard's description. The man had been well dressed but nervous, carrying an unusually heavy travel case and asking specific questions about connecting trains to Paris. He wanted to know about trains that didn't require advance booking, the clerk told them. said he preferred to maintain flexibility in his travel arrangements. In Paris they traced Richard to the Hotel Meurice, where he had registered under the name Robert Ashton, a transparent alias that suggested either confidence or desperation. The hotel staff remembered him well, a charming English gentleman who paid his bills in cash and seemed particularly interested in ship departures from Le Havre. He asked many questions about passenger ships to America, the concierge informed them. But then he departed suddenly, without taking the ship he had inquired about. Caroline studied the hotel register with growing concern. He's staying ahead of us, isn't he? Always one step away from capture. Perhaps, Poirot mused. Or perhaps he is leading us exactly where he wishes us to go. What do you mean? Consider, mademoiselle, your brother is intelligent enough to know that his disappearance would be discovered quickly. Yet he leaves a trail obvious enough for us to follow. Either he is less clever than he believes, or he has a reason for wanting to be pursued. Their next lead came from an unexpected source. While dining at a cafe near the Gare du Nord, Caroline overheard two women discussing a charming Englishman who had approached them with an unusual proposition. He wanted to hire my cousin Marie as a companion for his elderly aunt, one woman was saying. Offered very good money, but Marie was suspicious. The man had no references and his story kept changing. Poirot immediately approached the women and with his characteristic charm, learned that the Englishman had been seeking a young woman to accompany him to Italy as part of an elaborate deception involving a fictitious family emergency. He claimed his aunt had fallen ill in Florence and needed immediate care, the woman explained. But when Marie asked to speak with this aunt's doctor, the man became evasive and withdrew his offer. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Richard was indeed heading to Italy, but he needed cover for his journey, perhaps to avoid suspicion at border crossings or to establish credibility with his ultimate destination. They caught the next train to Florence, traveling through the night as the French countryside gave way to the Swiss Alps and then to the sun-drenched valleys of Tuscany. Caroline dozed fitfully in their compartment, but Poirot remained awake, his mind working through the implications of Richard's behavior. In Florence their investigation took on a more personal dimension. At the convent where Isabella Rossetti's daughter was being cared for, they learned that a man matching Richard's description had indeed appeared 2 days earlier. He claimed to be the child's father. Sister Maria Theresa told them in halting English, said he had come to take responsibility for his daughter at last. Caroline went pale. Did you allow him to see her? Naturally we were suspicious. This man had never acknowledged the child before, never provided any support. We insisted he prove his identity and his intentions, and he became angry when we asked for documentation, claimed we were interfering with his paternal rights. But we have seen too many men try to exploit orphaned children. We sent him away. Poirot leaned forward with interest. Did he say where he was staying in Florence? He mentioned the Villa Bella Vista near the Palazzo Pitti, but he has not returned since that first visit. The Villa Bella Vista proved to be an elegant pension catering to wealthy English travelers. The proprietor, Signora Benedetti, confirmed that Mr. Ashton had been a guest for 3 days but had departed that very morning. He left in great haste, she explained, paid his bill and departed without breakfast. Most unusual for an English gentleman. Did he mention where he was going? Roma, I believe. He asked about train schedules to Rome. But Poirot was no longer listening to the proprietor's words. His attention had been captured by the name on the guest register and by the woman who bore it. Signora Benedetti, he said carefully, your name appears on certain business documents connected to the Ashworth Shipping Company. The woman's composure faltered slightly. I know nothing of shipping companies, signore. Perhaps not. But your signature appears on invoices for services rendered, invoices that we now know to be fraudulent. Caroline stared at Poirot in amazement. You think Richard has been using this woman's identity for his embezzlement scheme? I think, mademoiselle, that your brother is more resourceful than we gave him credit for, and more dangerous. Signora Benedetti was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Signore, I assure you I know nothing of any fraud. But you do know Monsieur Richard, do you not? He has been a guest here before, perhaps many times over the past months. The woman's silence was answer enough. And he paid you well for the use of your name on certain documents. Documents you never read because they were written in English. He said it was for importing wine, she whispered. Said English law required an Italian partner for certain transactions. The money he paid, it helped me maintain the pension when business was poor. Poirot nodded sympathetically. You are a victim as much as anyone, signore. But now we must find Monsieur Richard before he involves others in his schemes. He is not going to Roma, Signora Benedetti said suddenly. I heard him speaking to someone on the telephone this morning. He mentioned Napoli, Naples, and from Naples, a ship perhaps. There are many ships from Naples to America, to South America, places where a man might disappear. As they hurried to catch the next train south, Caroline voiced the fear that had been growing in both their minds. He's going to escape, isn't he? All the way to South America, where we'll never find him. Poirot settled into their train compartment as the Italian countryside rushed past. Perhaps, mademoiselle, but consider this: your brother has made one crucial error in his planning. What error? He has underestimated the power of human connection. His visit to the convent, his attempt to see Isabella's daughter, these were not the actions of a man simply fleeing justice. Caroline frowned. I don't understand. Your brother may be a criminal, but he is also a man haunted by his past. The child represents unfinished business, a loose thread in his carefully constructed web of deceptions. He cannot simply disappear without resolving this matter. But the nuns turned him away. Yes, but I suspect he will try again. Men like Richard do not accept defeat easily, especially when their pride is involved. The train pulled into Naples as the sun was setting over the bay, painting the harbour in shades of gold and crimson. The port was bustling with activity, passenger ships, cargo vessels, and smaller craft creating a maze of masts and smokestacks against the evening sky. Their first stop was the harbour master's office, where Poirot's reputation and a few well-placed lira soon produced information about recent English passengers seeking passage to distant shores. See, there was such a man, the clerk confirmed. Wanted booking on the next ship to Buenos Aires. But the ship, she is full. He became quite agitated when we could not accommodate him. When does the next ship depart for South America? Not for 10 days, signore. The Santa Maria leaves Tuesday next for Argentina. 10 days, time enough to track down Richard before he could disappear forever. But as they left the harbour office, Poirot was surprised to see a familiar figure hurrying toward them along the waterfront. It was Jenny, Miss Whitmore's former maid, looking travel-worn but determined. Monsieur Poirot, Miss Caroline, she called out breathlessly. Thank goodness I found you. Caroline stared in amazement. Jenny, what on earth are you doing in Naples? Miss Whitmore sent me, miss. She's here in Italy, visiting that little girl at the convent. When she heard you were pursuing Master Richard, she insisted I find you and warn you. Warn us about what? Jenny looked around nervously before speaking in a lower voice. He's not just running away, miss. He's planning something terrible. Miss Whitmore overheard him talking to someone, another Englishman, about making sure certain people never testify against him. Poirot felt a chill that had nothing to do with the sea breeze. What sort of people, Jenny? People who know about his business dealings, sir. People who could identify him in court. Miss Whitmore thinks he means to harm them. The implications were staggering. Richard wasn't simply fleeing, he was planning to eliminate witnesses to his crimes. The pursuit had become something far more urgent than recovering stolen money. Where is Miss Whitmore now? Caroline asked. Back at the convent, miss. She's trying to protect the little girl in case Master Richard returns there. Poirot's mind was racing. Richard's visit to the convent suddenly took on a sinister new meaning. If he believed the child could somehow expose his past crimes or provide evidence against him, we must return to Florence immediately, he announced. The night train, if there is one. But what about the ship to Buenos Aires? Caroline protested. The ship was a diversion, mademoiselle. Your brother never intended to flee to South America. He intends to eliminate the evidence of his crimes here in Italy, then disappear with a clean slate. As they hurried through the narrow streets of Naples toward the railway station, Poirot explained his growing suspicions. Consider the timeline. Richard arrives in Florence, attempts to see Isabella's daughter, is refused access. That same day,
He makes inquiries about ships to South America, ensuring that anyone following him would learn of his supposed escape plans. But instead of boarding a ship, he remains in Italy, planning something far more sinister. You think he means to harm the child? I think he sees her as a potential threat to his freedom. If the child bears a strong resemblance to him, if she could be used to prove paternity and establish a pattern of abandoned responsibilities. Jenny shuddered. He wouldn't hurt a baby, would he? Surely even Master Richard wouldn't. But Poirot's expression was grim. A man who has embezzled £50,000 and is prepared to kill witnesses to his crimes has already crossed lines most people would consider unthinkable. The night train to Florence seemed to crawl through the darkness, stopping at every small station along the route. Caroline dozed fitfully, while Jenny sat wide awake, clutching a rosary and murmuring prayers in the dialect of her childhood. Poirot remained alert, watching the countryside flash past and calculating distances and travel times. If Richard had left Naples that morning as planned, he could already be back in Florence, already at the convent. As dawn broke over the Tuscan hills, revealing vineyards and olive groves bathed in golden light, the train finally pulled into Florence's Santa Maria Novella station. They disembarked quickly and hired a carriage to take them to the convent, racing through streets that were just beginning to stir with morning activity. The convent of Santa Cara sat on a hill overlooking the city, its ancient stone walls offering sanctuary to the orphaned and abandoned. But as their carriage approached the gates, Poirot noticed something that made his blood run cold. The gates stood open, and there was no sign of the usual morning activity, no nuns tending the gardens, no children's voices echoing from the courtyard. "Something is wrong," he murmured, stepping down from the carriage before it had fully stopped. They approached the entrance cautiously, calling out greetings in Italian and English. Finally Sister Maria Teresa appeared, her face drawn with worry and exhaustion. "Monsieur Poirot, Grazia Dio, you have come. Something terrible has happened. The child, Isabella's daughter, she is safe, thanks to your English lady friend. But the man, the one who claimed to be the father, he returned last night with others. They tried to force their way into the convent." Caroline gripped Poirot's arm. "Miss Whitmore, is she all right?" "She is here, but she was injured trying to protect the bambina. The doctor is with her now." As they followed Sister Maria Teresa through the convent's corridors, Poirot's mind was already working on the next phase of their confrontation with Richard Ashworth. The man had revealed his true nature at last, not just a fraud and embezzler, but a criminal willing to use violence to protect his secrets. The game was no longer simply about recovering stolen money or exposing past deceptions, it had become a matter of life and death.
Chapter 10. The Final Reckoning. They found Miss Whitmore in the convent's small infirmary, her left arm in a sling but her spirit unbroken. She was sitting beside a crib where a beautiful dark-haired infant slept peacefully, unaware of the danger that had threatened her the night before. "Celeste," Caroline rushed to her friend's side. "Are you badly hurt?" "Nothing serious, a dislocated shoulder from being pushed against a wall, but I was so frightened for little Isabella." Miss Whitmore gazed down at the sleeping child with obvious tenderness. "She's so beautiful, Caroline. She has her mother's eyes, but her father's chin," Poirot observed quietly. "There can be no doubt about the parentage." Sister Maria Teresa joined them, her face grave. The man brought two others with him, rough men who spoke little Italian. They demanded we surrender the child, claimed legal guardianship. Did they have documents? Papers, yes, but even I could see they were hastily forged. The seals were wrong, the signatures obviously false. Miss Whitmore adjusted her position carefully, wincing slightly. "When I refused to let them take Isabella, Richard became violent. He said the child was evidence of his past mistakes, and mistakes needed to be corrected." The euphemism sent a chill through the room. Caroline stared at her former fiancé's capacity for evil. "Where is Richard now?" Poirot asked. "Gone for the moment. But he threatened to return with official papers, legitimate authorities. He claimed he could have us all arrested for interfering with his parental rights." "Empty threats," Poirot said with confidence. "A man fleeing embezzlement charges cannot afford to involve legitimate authorities, but he may try other methods. Jenny, who had been silent since their arrival, suddenly spoke up. "Begging your pardon, sir, but I think I know where Master Richard might be hiding." All eyes turned to her. "There's an old villa outside the city, belonged to that lady he was involved with years ago, Isabella's family estate. Miss Whitmore mentioned it when she was telling me about researching the little one's background." "Of course," Miss Whitmore exclaimed. "The Villa Rossetti. Isabella inherited it from her father, but it's been abandoned since her death. Richard would know about it from his time with her." Poirot's eyes began to gleam with delight. Caroline recognized as his hunting instinct fully aroused. "Mademoiselle, you may have provided the key to ending this affair once and for all, but if he's armed, if he has those rough men with him, then we must ensure we have appropriate assistance." Poirot turned to Sister Maria Theresa. "Is there a telephone here? I must contact the local carabinieri. See in the Mother Superior's office." As Poirot went to summon official help, Caroline remained with Miss Whitmore and the baby. The child had awakened and was gazing up at them with dark eyes that indeed seemed to hold echoes of her tragic mother. "What will happen to her?" Caroline asked softly. "I've already begun adoption proceedings," Miss Whitmore replied. "She'll come home with me to England, where she'll have every advantage her father should have provided." "And Richard?" Miss Whitmore's expression hardened. "Richard will face justice. For the embezzlement, for abandoning Isabella, for what he tried to do here last night. No more running, no more lies." Poirot returned with the news that a squad of carabinieri would meet them at the Villa Rossetti within the hour. As they prepared to leave the convent, he pulled Caroline aside. "Mademoiselle, I must ask something difficult of you. When we confront your brother, he may try to play on your family loyalty, your love for him despite his crimes. I understand, I won't let sentiment interfere with justice. Bien, because I suspect this final confrontation will test all of us in ways we cannot yet imagine." The Villa Rossetti sat in a valley 20 kilometers from Florence, surrounded by neglected vineyards and olive groves that spoke of former prosperity. The villa itself was a Renaissance masterpiece, slowly crumbling from abandonment, broken windows, overgrown gardens, and an air of tragic decay that seemed fitting for Isabella's family seat. They approached carefully, accompanied by 6 armed carabinieri under the command of Captain Benedetti, a coincidence of names that Poirot noted with wry amusement. The captain was a professional, who listened to their explanation with grave attention before deploying his men around the villa's perimeter. "We have observed smoke from the villa's chimney," he informed them. "Someone is indeed inside." As they drew closer, they could see signs of recent occupation, a carriage in the courtyard, windows that had been hastily repaired, the grounds partially cleared. Richard had indeed taken refuge in his former lover's abandoned home. Captain Benedetti approached the front door with 2 of his men, while the others covered the possible escape routes. His knock echoed through the villa like a gunshot. "Apri to carabinieri." There was a long pause, then the sound of footsteps. The door opened to reveal Richard Ashworth, looking haggard, but still maintaining his aristocratic bearing. Behind him, Poirot could see 2 rough-looking men, the hired muscle Sister Maria Theresa had described. "Good morning, Richard," Caroline said quietly. "It's time to come home." For a moment, brother and sister simply stared at each other across the threshold. Then Richard's face twisted with something between rage and despair. "You've ruined everything, Caroline. You and your precious moral superiority. I've ruined nothing that wasn't already corrupted." Richard turned his attention to Poirot, his eyes filled with hatred. "And you, little Belgian detective, so proud of your cleverness, but you've simply hastened the inevitable. The inevitable being justice, monsieur. The inevitable being the destruction of everything our family has built. When this scandal breaks, when the newspapers finish with us, the Ashworth name will be synonymous with fraud and embezzlement." Captain Benedetti stepped forward. "Signor Ashworth, you are under arrest for attempted kidnapping and conspiracy to commit fraud. You will come with us now." But Richard made no move to surrender. Instead, he called over his shoulder in Italian, and his 2 companions appeared beside him, their hands visibly resting on concealed weapons. "I think not, Captain. You see, I've made other arrangements. The standoff stretched taut as a violin string. 6 carabinieri against 3 desperate men in a crumbling villa, with innocent lives hanging in the balance. Then Poirot stepped forward, his voice carrying absolute authority despite his small stature. Monsieur Richard, you have lost. The embezzlement has been discovered, your accomplices have been identified, and your escape routes have been closed. Surrender now, and you may still retain some dignity in defeat. Dignity, Richard laughed bitterly. From a man who would see his own family destroyed for the sake of abstract justice. From a man who finally chooses truth over deception. It is not too late to end this honorably. For a long moment, the issue balanced on a knife's edge. Then Richard's shoulders sagged in defeat, and he stepped aside to allow the carabinieri to enter. The arrest proceeded without violence, though Richard's hired men required some persuasion to surrender their weapons. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Richard looked at his sister with something that might have been regret. I'm sorry, Caroline, I truly am. I never meant for it to go this far. I know, she replied softly, but intentions don't undo the harm that's been done. As Richard was led away to face Italian justice and eventual extradition to England, Poirot reflected on the curious way truth had finally triumphed, not through clever deduction alone, but through the courage of those who chose principle over convenience, justice over family loyalty, and love over fear. The ring that had started this adventure had been hidden to avoid an unwelcome truth, but in the end, it was truth itself that had provided the real solution, not just to the mystery of its disappearance, but to the larger question of what people owe each other in the complex web of human relationships. Miss Whitmore would return to England with little Isabella, giving the child the life her father had denied her. Caroline would help rebuild the family shipping business on a foundation of genuine integrity, and Richard would face the consequences of choices that had seemed so clever at the time, but had ultimately led to his downfall. As for the ring itself, it remained on Miss Whitmore's right hand, a symbol no longer of broken promises, but of wisdom hard won, and a future built on truth rather than illusion. In the carriage returning to Florence, Caroline turned to Poirot with a question that had been troubling her. Do you think Richard is truly evil, or simply weak? Poirot considered this carefully before responding. Perhaps, mademoiselle, that is a distinction without meaning. The harm caused by weakness can be just as devastating as the harm caused by malice. In the end, we are all judged not by our intentions but by our actions. And what of forgiveness? Ah, said the little detective with a gentle smile, that is a question for philosophers and priests, not for detectives. My job was simply to uncover the truth. What people do with that truth, that is between them and their consciences. As the towers of Florence appeared in the distance, Poirot allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Another case closed, another truth revealed, another small victory for justice in a world that often seemed to reward deception over honesty. But more than that, he had witnessed something remarkable, the transformation of a frightened young woman into someone strong enough to face truth and build a future on its foundation. Miss Whitmore's ring had been hidden in a piano, but her true strength had been hidden far deeper, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And that perhaps was the most satisfying solution of all. 6 months later, Poirot received a letter postmarked from London, written in Miss Whitmore's familiar hand. She wrote to inform him that little Isabella was thriving in her new home, that the adoption had been finalized, and that she had established a foundation to support other orphaned children in Italy. She also mentioned that Caroline Ashworth had become a frequent visitor, and that they had become close friends bonded by their shared experience of that tumultuous week when truth had finally triumphed over deception. Richard, she noted, had been sentenced to 7 years in prison for embezzlement and fraud. He had in the end cooperated fully with authorities, providing information that helped recover most of the stolen funds and implicated other criminals in his network of deception. But perhaps most interesting to Poirot was her final paragraph. You may be amused to know that I have taken up piano lessons. Caroline is teaching me, using the same instrument where my ring was hidden. We have discovered that music, like truth, has a way of revealing hidden depths in both the performer and the listener. I thought you would appreciate the poetry of that. Poirot set down the letter with a smile. Indeed, there was poetry in it. The idea that the piano which had witnessed deception had now become an instrument of friendship and growth. He had learned long ago that the most satisfying mysteries were not those that ended with dramatic arrests and courtroom revelations, but those that concluded with people discovering their own capacity for courage, wisdom and redemption. The ring that had been hidden in the piano had found its way home, and in doing so, it had revealed truths far more valuable than any sapphire or diamond, truths about the nature of love, the importance of honesty, and the possibility of building a future on the foundation of hard-won wisdom rather than comfortable illusions. Outside his window, London continued its endless symphony of human drama, some comic, some tragic, all meaningful to those who lived them. And somewhere in that vast city, a young woman was learning to play piano while a little girl played at her feet, both of them living proof that sometimes the most beautiful music emerges from the resolution of discord into harmony. Poirot returned to his correspondence, but not before making a note in his case file. Truth, like music, requires both skill and courage to perform properly, but when performed well, both can transform lives in ways that surprise even the performer. It was, he thought, a fitting conclusion to the case of the ring she hid in the piano. This concludes our tale from the archives of Hercule Poirot. Thank you for joining us at Cozy Mysteries, where we believe that every mystery solved reveals something meaningful about the human condition. Until next time, this is Stephen, reminding you that truth, like music, has a way of finding its voice when the time is right.